Hello, I'm Robert Johnstone, Vice President of the Wood Library Museum of Anesthesiology. I'm in San Antonio, Texas at the ASA annual meeting. It is October 10, 2025, and it's my honor to talk with Adrian Gelb, Professor Emeritus at the University of California, San Francisco, Department of Anesthesiology and Perioperative Medicine. Dr. Gelb, you have had an incredibly distinguished career, academics, institutional management, and humanitarian service. With that international background, I'm curious, where did you grow up and get your education?
I'd just like to start by thanking you for this interview and the Woodland Library for including me. I grew up in Cape Town, South Africa, went to junior and high school there, went to medical school in Cape Town, interned at Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, and then in Durban, South Africa, did the beginnings of what in North America would be a surgical residency, but it was structured in the British way, so it was a senior house officer role. It led me to believe that I wasn't cut out to be a surgeon. But anyway, that's where I grew up and my initial education.
Now, there are quite a few famous people that have come from South Africa, Elon Musk and other people. Did you grow up knowing any of those people?
Well, Elon Musk's a little younger than I am, so no, our paths didn't cross. I'd say the only famous person I can remember interacting with was Chris Barnard, who performed the world's first heart transplant. So I was a medical student at the time.
Wow.
And he would, on occasion, bring his visiting celebrities around the labs when we were working, and never stopped to introduce himself or any of his visitors. But it was sort of part of what was ongoing and the hum on the campus when we weren't striking or protesting.
So you were exposed to a lot of surgery. What got you interested in anesthesia?
So I was really drawn to acute care medicine initially, and drifted as a medical student to thinking of myself as an obstetrician. I was fascinated by the placental fetal physiology, the sort of the two circulations, and really enjoyed it. We had a required rotation in anesthesia that I found as a medical student, much ignored in the operating room, utterly boring. But as interns, we were required to do 50 anesthetics. And the concept at the time was that the majority of medical graduates would go into general practice. Many, they hoped, in rural communities, and so being able to do some anesthetics was a requirement. And that's when I started to see anesthesia in a different light. And two events stick out vividly in my mind. One was on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, going to the operating room with my little anesthesia book that needed to be signed off, and watching, fascinated as an anesthesiologist, looking after a patient with a facial trauma, just turned around, picked up an endotracheal tube, put it through the nose, and it seemed to go into the trachea and the lungs. And the next thing, the patient was being ventilated. It just seemed phenomenal. Absolutely magical. And the other experience, again, over the weekend, I went up to the operating room, and Gay Harrison was the head of the department, well known at that time and subsequently among malignant hypothermia people. And he actually came rushing off the squash court and said to me, he's just going to have a quick shower, go into that room. There's a diabetic man who needs his foot amputated. Draw up the medications you, Adrian, think are needed. And then he came back, after 5-10 minutes, looked at what I'd done, told me what was right, what was wrong, and then spoke me through the whole anesthetic, the thiopental, some analgesic, the halothane. And I started thinking, wow, this really is exciting. And then when I did that surgery rotation post-internship, as I said, I very quickly realized I enjoyed the operating room environment and the activity. I had no interest in the petty point of surgery, this repetitive activity. But I was fascinated by the physiology and discovered that anesthesiologists ran the intensive care unit. And I decided, hey, I want to be one of these guys.
Tell me about your anesthesia training then. So it started actually before real anesthesia training.
So even towards the end of that surgical rotation, if there were enough people standing around, I would ask whoever the chief surgeon was, could I scrub out? I'd go stand with the anesthesia people and get some flavor of that. And I did a 2-week, it was actually a refresher course offered to family doctors, but I signed up for that, gave me some rudiments. And then I worked at a rural mission hospital where I took on the role as the anesthesiologist. Not that I knew much, but it gave me some experience at managing simple airways. It gave me an opportunity to try my hand at ketamine. And one's really stuck. You know, there's one of you is doing surgery, one of you is doing anesthesia, and neither of us were necessarily formally trained. It was humbling and eye-opening, and the whole experience of rural healthcare fascinated me about the need, the people, the neglect by national and regional healthcare systems. And I remember sitting on the balcony of our rondavel. It's a round mud hut, actually made of mud and cow dung, and thatch roof. And thinking to myself, or saying to my wife, you know, I'd really like, perhaps towards the end of my career, doing something more along these lines. And that was sort of the nidus, I think, of the global health interest. I could say parenthetically, initially we were a little appalled at being sent or assigned a mud cow dung abode, but it turned out to be very climate compliant, much more than the brick and mortar and corrugated roofing structures that many of the others had. It was relatively warm in wintertime, and it was very pleasantly cool in the summertime. So with insight, and the locals often know more than us Westerners.
Well, that's quite a start for anesthesia. How about your formal anesthesia training?
So I started anesthetics in England, in Bath, which is a lovely Georgian town, probably about 100 miles due east of London. And at that time, I was very lucky that the consultant staff, the faculty, it was a fairly small department, maybe 15, 16 consultants, were for the most part young individuals who had all graduated within the last 10 years. So it was easy to identify. And they were very supportive and encouraging. And at a social event, one of them asked who is going to the London refresher or preparatory lecture series for anesthesia. And I turned to the guy next to me. I said, what's this London thing? And he said, yeah, you know, they'll send you fully paid for 2 weeks to London to do the refresher course before the exams. I said, hey, I want to go. I mean, why not? And then having done that, I felt obliged to actually do the exam. So that's how I came to have a diploma in anesthetics from the Royal College in the UK. But that was the beginning. And when we left South Africa, our plan had been to try and get to Canada. Both my wife and I had enjoyed Canadian National Film Board films in school. The snow looked so romantic. And culturally and politically, it was more akin to South Africa, and there had been a British colony. And I'd mentioned that to one of the attendings, our interest. She saw me around the OR at probably halfway through my experience, and she said, I've just come back from the Canadian anesthesia meeting, and they'll give you a resident position. And so I went back to our apartment, our flat, told my wife this very excitedly, and I said it was some place called London, Ontario. And we took out our Reader's Digest Atlas, looked it up. There was such a place. So I said, that sounds fine, let's go.
And you were there for how long?
So we were in England for about 18 months. So the SHO positions were, probably still are, like 6 monthly renewable. So I did 6 months, enjoyed it so much that I signed up for another 6 months. And then I signed up for a third 6 months. Bath was a lovely place to stay as a city, a lot of Georgian architecture. There, the hot baths, the old cathedral. And they eventually said to me, look, you can't just stay in this equivalent of a first-year trainee forever. You need to go to a registrar-level training somewhere else in the UK. And so we said, fine, we're off to Canada. Thank you very much. So I had 18 months of training there. And then the Canadian college eventually gave me credit for a year of training. So that shortened my residency in Canada.
And then, let's see, you went to Mayo Clinic, is that
So I actually moved during the residency, a real itinerant as I look back. London, Ontario was good to me, but I didn't feel it was academic enough for what I wanted. So the chair of the department that I was telling you about beforehand was very agreeable to helping me move to the University of Toronto on condition that I came back to London as a faculty. So I found myself as a second-year resident being asked to commit to a faculty position. 2-3 years in the future.
I think they spotted somebody pretty talented.
Well, I don't know about that. I was a little bewildered by it, but I said, sure, if you can sort out our immigration and guarantee a position, I'm willing to do it. But I went to Toronto, enjoyed the residency there. And as a resident, actually in London, Ontario, I got engaged in some respiratory physiology research. My own little initiative in that research, I think, got my research mentor interested in facilitating my engagement in respiratory physiology. And so the plan was I'd go to Toronto, finish my residency, and then do a research fellowship at one of 3 places, either with Tom Hornbein in Seattle, or at the CVRI at UCSF, or with Kai Rader at Mayo. And Kai came up with a salary first. The CVRI turned me down. So it's sort of ironic that eventually in my career I landed up at UCSF.
And that was tied in more, the Mayo with neuroanesthesia.
No. It was
all respiratory.
It was all respiratory. I spent a year doing lung mechanics, which I found fascinating, But I also learned, I think, one of the most important things one needs to learn, and that's what you have no aptitude for. And I have no aptitude for physics. And the research group included an engineer who, before he got into respiratory physiology, was designing wings for Boeing. The head of the unit, Bob Hyatt, invented the flow volume loop by Hyatt and Fry. And there were a number of other people who were engineers. And I'd occasionally, ask these simple questions like, why are we dividing by the cube root in calculating this? And this sort of table of engineers was, sort of leaned forward and looking at me and said, but Adrian, what else would you divide by if not the cube root? And so I realized I had no real aptitude for moving forward in lung mechanics, but it was a phenomenal learning experience.
How did you balance the clinical side of anesthesia with the research? You seemed you were attracted early on to the research side. Is that correct?
One has the impression, one knows, children like to explore things. The stereotypical kid, pull the doll apart, break that Christmas gift to see how it works, and then, cry when it doesn't fit together. And usually the school system bludgeons that out of most people. And somehow the school system failed me in that regard. And so I retained this sort of curiosity on how does that work? Why does it happen? Could I put it together this way instead of that way? So that interest and curiosity remained with me, which is what kept me drifting towards research. But I also loved the clinical work and the technical aspects involved in it. As a resident, I was given some time to do some research, which was uncommon at the time. I got 6 months off to do a research project. At Mayo, I was full-time research. I didn't want to do any clinical activity. I'd go and hang out in the occasional operating room, see how things were done at Mayo, but my focus was really getting research experience. Jack Mitchenfelder was in the lab next door, and a little further along, Thor Sant, who was a very dominant and productive neurosurgeon. And so I got some interaction with neuro, but it wasn't my primary interest. And I was forced into neuroanesthesia. It was not my choice.
Mitchenfelder's pretty forceful, or was, yeah.
Well, it wasn't actually Jack who forced me. It was back when I went back as a faculty member to London, Ontario, which at that time was the world's busiest cerebral aneurysm center. And in fact, some of the early work on coiling was done there. Fernando Venuela, whose name is on that first publication with Guglielmo, Fernando and I were actually residents together, he in radiology, me in anesthesia. But there was a very vibrant and active neuro activity. And I came back on staff believing that I was going to be a half-time ICU, half-time clinical, and half-time research, however that was going to play out. And Wolf Sparrell, the department chairman, called me and a few others, young new faculty, into his office one at a time. And he said, you're going to do neuroanesthesia. And I said, I have no interest in working with those crazy surgeons in a dark room. I want to be in the ICU and doing other clinical stuff. And he said, well, you think about it, and we'll meet again. And so we met again a week later. I said, I've thought about it. I definitely do not want to do this. And he said, you think some more. and I, when the OR schedule came out for Monday, there I was in a neuro room, and three times the next week.
Now, how did you balance? You were department chair in Ontario for a decade, I think, about
12 years.
How
yes.
did you balance your duties between administrative, clinical, and research?
Working hard, running hard, and that's what nights and weekends were for.
Wow.
It made it tough for faculty to come and whine to me about how they don't have enough non-clinical time to do what they're doing. But being the chairman also gives you some leverage. So I dropped out of the ICU and I took on the administrative role. But I could also use some influence to, I've got to get to a meeting, somebody needs to cover the OR. But I committed to myself when I took on that role as chair at the tender age of 39, that the credibility of an anesthesia chair is intimately linked to clinical credibility. Surgeons will badmouth you about, well, you can't give an anesthetic. How do you expect him to, run the department or understand things? And so I still did about a quarter of my cases on my own. No residents, no fellows. Just wanted to prove I could still do cases, turn them around as fast as anybody else if that was the metric. And I think built a good clinical reputation with surgeons, particularly the neurosurgeons, to the point where they actually made me an offer to step out of my administrative role and become a member of the neurosurgical department. Wow. In some kind of quasi-leadership role. Well, that would be absolute suicide to do that. But I was flattered by the offer. But it did involve balancing a lot of things. My grant writing, for the most part, was late at night. Go home, spend some time with the family, and then at 10 p.m., go to my desk and put in a couple of hours of writing.
Wow. What led you to move from Ontario to University of California, San Francisco?
The little preamble to that is chairs in Canada are 5 years renewable once, so they have finite ends. So at 39, I knew by 49, 50, I was likely done, at least as chair in that department. I could go and be a chair at any other department. But I felt that I'd had enough of being a chair. I knew I could do it. I could, in a sense, tick that box. And I still enjoyed clinical work, research, and I had growing interests in global health and other activities. That time I was on the board of trustees of the IARS. There have historically been one or two Canadians on that board, going back almost to the beginning of the organization. I was on the board and took on the role of journal liaison for anesthesia and analgesia. And so Ron Miller and I got to spend a fair amount of time together. And I was already starting to have a sort of an international reputation as a speaker. So Ron and I would land up at conferences in Japan or Europe and spend time together. And he joked when he introduced me at one of my recruiting visits to UCSF, he said to the department, I'll tell you a secret none of you know. Adrian is actually my boss. And at the time I was the chair of the board. His role as editor-in-chief involved reporting to me twice a year. But we came to know each other, and while we were totally different personalities, we shared common philosophies on how a department should run. And how to strategically position an anesthetic department. And so he started saying to me, well, if you're going to step down as a chair, and he would follow it by saying, and I don't understand how you could step down as a chair, why don't you come join me at UCSF? And they went on for, about 3 years. I went and visited, and he probably set it up for January when there was snow in Canada and just a little light rain in San Francisco, so that was quite appealing. And San Francisco is a very likable city. It's a culturally rich city. It's small. It's very reminiscent of Cape Town. Cape Town has a single mountain and ocean. San Francisco has 42 hills and ocean, but it has some of the same feel. And UCSF is an incredible academic department.
Well, that it is. How did you how did you get involved with the World Federation of Societies of Anesthesiologists?
So through my time in London, Ontario, initially under the influence of the then chair, Wolf Sperrell, who had these international interests. So there'd be people from India, China, Eastern Europe who'd come through the department. And I enjoyed chatting with them, hosting some of them at our house. So that sparked a sort of general interest. And then I was willing to travel to some of these countries and self-sponsored. And so started building a friendship, an influence group, if you will, in both those countries, in China and in India in particular. And so I had a lot of interest, a growing interest in patient safety as an entity. And Alan Mary really got me directly involved. I spoke at every World Congress from 1988 onwards. And so was peripherally involved, but not really involved in the meat of the organization. And my view as a youngster looking at it was, it's an organization for retired and semi-retired people looking to teach in poorer countries, which is totally wrong. Alan Mary, at one of the ASAs, sat me down at a quiet corner and said, would I be interested in being involved in the Patient Safety Committee, which he chaired at the time, and then further engagement in WFSA. And I said, yes, that would be of interest, provided there would be an opportunity to expand that function and perhaps the role of the WFSA. And he said, yes, that's exactly the vision that's being pursued, an expanded vision for WFSA. So that was my beginning back in 2010. And so I was on the committee, then I chaired the committee from 2012, 2016, and then worked my way up the hierarchy. But WFSA has had a long-standing relationship with the World Health Organization, and I think has been an official non-state actor in WHO lingo probably since the 70s. And so there was a need for somebody to function as a liaison. And Janneke Mellon-Olsen and I kind of put up our hands and said, sure, we'd be interested. Janneke was based in Norway, so it was a little more convenient. But I started whenever I was at a conference in Europe, detouring to Geneva, and on behalf of WFSA, going to the World Health Organization's annual meeting, the World Health Assembly, since about 2014. So it's built not only an involvement in WFSA and its broader vision, but also a strong linkage to the World Health Organization.
What are the strengths of the WFSA, and what's the future of the WFSA?
I think WFSA has become a very influential and powerful advocacy organization for anesthesiologists. I think way more than the vast majority of anesthesiologists in high-income countries realize. So WFSA is the official voice of anesthesiology at the WHO. So we have the opportunity to make statements to the executive board about the importance of anesthesiology in everything from emergency care, pandemic responsiveness, definitions of oxygen, all kinds of matters that creep into practice without one necessarily realizing where it came from. And we've now gone a step further. We've established a presence at all of the regional WHO groups, including PAHO, which is the Pan American Health Organization. So we have participation and statements there about anesthesiology. And the other arm for WFSA is education. And that education, while primarily aimed at lower resource setting, in fact, is available and of an international standard. So Anesthesia Tutorial of the Week, which comes out probably closer to every 2 weeks, is like a short textbook chapter. It's written by and large by people in high-income countries in the US, Australia, the UK. It's free of charge. It's online. I'd encourage residents and fellows to have a look at it and to consider writing for it. So I'd say education and advocacy are the two main aspects.
How would you get more U.S. anesthesiologists involved? How should that happen with the WFSA?
Volunteering for activity. And there are a number of ways of volunteering. One is by applying to be on committees. The problem, a good thing and a problem for WFSA is that it has an obligation to be global. And so the makeup of the committees have to reflect all 6 geographic regions and the like. And so Sydney, through my tenure, on the board and as the president, you look at phenomenal American applicants and you say, well, we could only have 1 or maybe 2 on the committee. But there's absolutely no reason that one can't work with WFSA outside of a committee. And so if one has projects and people and work to do, reach out to WFSA and say, this is something we want to do. We have an online global mentorship offering. If anybody's interested in mentoring anesthesiologists in less fortunate countries, and they aren't all desperately poverty-stricken. They include many middle-income countries. Just go to the WFSA website, wfsahq.org, and find the mentor tab and sign up as a volunteer. So lots of opportunities.
Good advice. You're of course very well known as for WFSA and humanitarian work. Got the ASA Humanitarian Award. You're also very well known for all your research. I think have published or authored hundreds of articles. What can you tell us about that? What are the joys of that, and what are you most proud of in your research?
I'll take that as 2 questions. Research really is interesting. It's challenging. The mechanics and the politics and the funding aspect are the worst aspect of it. But the opportunity to ask clinically relevant questions and research, even if it's molecular biology, must be driven by clinical needs and questions. And the questions can be as simple as, how does this work? Why does this work? Why doesn't this do what we think it should do? Through to, why do we practice this way? How could we make practice safer? But the joy of it is ultimately seeing it published, seeing the answer to the questions you started off with, seeing it published. And also the ego satisfaction of people acknowledging some of those publications. I mean, most of most people's publications are lucky to be cited 4 or 5 times. So it's uncommon to have a lot of highly cited publications, but they're still all like children in a sense. I think my most useful publication, perhaps most influential, was the WHO, WFSA International Standards for a Safe Practice of Anesthesia. To my knowledge, that has been adopted as aspirational by 2 ministries of health, as national aspiration targets. And I know other ministries of health, anesthesiology societies have picked off pieces of it. So it's a piece of work both in content and in the concept that I'm proud of. It has its original origins here in the ASA with John Eichhorn back in 1992, drafting the first set of safety standards for WFSA. So there is this long linkage, in a sense, back to the origins of APSF, for example.
So you have had a long anesthesia career, and what has changed in global perspective? What is the biggest changes that you have seen? Is it whether that's patient safety that you were talking about, or what would you rate as the greatest changes in anesthesia over your career?
I'm going to make this comment tomorrow in my Ellis and Pierce lecture, but I think the huge steps forward have been standards and technology and the coupling of those together, and obviously the education that's needed to translate standards and technology into clinical practice. I think that's resulted in a huge leap forward in anesthetic safety. In terms of challenges ahead of us, workforce, without a doubt, is the biggest global challenge. In relation to things like standards and technology, getting technology and implementable standards to low and middle income countries is a challenge. Most companies are not interested in selling equipment to countries that can't afford to pay the same price your institution or mine are willing to pay. And I think that does a global disservice to fellow human beings with the same surgical and anesthetic needs as we do. And that's one of my current struggles with my interactions with industry. And they just say, yeah, we agree with you, but, our board wants to see us turn a profit in 2 years, not a 5 to 10 year timeline. The challenge, in addition to moving the technology along increasingly to enhance safety, is workforce in every aspect of it. And that truly is a global problem. It affects us as much as it affects low and middle income countries. It affects us a little differently, perhaps, but it's the same fundamental challenge. And I think the challenge goes beyond just numbers of people. I think the workforce challenge includes deciding exactly who are we and what do we need to do, and how we set about trying to control our future. I mean, there's a limit to the extent in which one can control the future. But if one looks at it from a historical perspective, the jobs that physicians have done have always been taken over by individuals with lesser training. We think back, 150 years, 200 years, physician would count the pulse rate, count the respiration, a really slick clinician maybe look at a neck vein or something in the nail bed. And then the outrageous happened during the Crimea War. This woman called Florence Nightingale demonstrated that a woman no less, could count the pulse and the respiration, gave birth to nursing. And so physicians then moved on to other skills. And I think we really have to be very proactive in deciding what are the cases that no longer need us, and how are we going to transition into those that do need us. And my sense is we're kind of stuck for pragmatic reasons largely with, I don't want to give up my lucrative practice, even though I realize secretly that this can and is being done by somebody with lesser skills than I have. But I think the leadership of our specialty needs to help figure out that movement. And part of that, I think, will be or could be achieved by looking at what's happened to medicine and surgery. There was a time when a surgeon did everything, did urology, did knee surgery, did the odd cesarean section if the obstetrician was busy. And the same on the medicine side. And they've progressively fragmented into base years and then a whole new set of core skills. And it seems to me anesthesia is, in a sense, drifting in that direction, but probably not fast enough. We're still making people who want to do critical care do a whole residency and then do critical care. Somebody who wants to do pain management still has to do a whole anesthetic residency, then pain management. And you've got to wonder, is there meaningful translation from 3 months of cardiac anesthesia to a chronic pain practice, for example? Maybe, maybe not. And so I would see anesthesia eventually going the same way as those other large groups, a base training, and then you decide you're a perioperative anesthesiologist, you're an intraoperative anesthesiologist, and within that you do cardiac neuro, vascular, for example, routine simple cases done by another cadre of providers, critical care, and the like. And so we're sort of muddling in that direction. But if we look at what's happening in some of the European countries, for example, where nurse anesthetists significantly outnumber physician anesthesiologists. I'm led to believe in countries like Norway for ASA 1 and 2 patients, as long as there's an anesthesiologist in the building, 2 nurse anesthetists in a room can proceed with the case.
I did not know that. That is very interesting. You've mentioned a number of people talking here, I think recently John Eichhorn, before that Ron Miller. Anybody else that's been influential in your life or that you want to talk about? It's hard to single out individuals without leaving out other individuals. I am immensely grateful to most of the ASA leadership over the years that they've allowed me the privilege of reaching out to them, making suggestions, trusting me to make international arrangements on behalf of the ASA. It's been a phenomenal privilege. I think it actually started back with Mark Warner, Dan Cole, Alex Hannenberg, but has continued through successive ASA leaderships, and that to me has been enormously satisfying. And while it's odd when one's in a leadership position to think that people are embarrassed or afraid to reach out to one, it is the reality. And so I've really enjoyed the opportunity to interact not only nationally but internationally with
successive ASA leaderships, and I've been impressed at the vision and depth of the ASA leadership. And I think much of the rank and file kind of see some of them, the Monday morning outreach, but some comments made at the opening ceremony. But I don't think they necessarily realize that the majority of the ASA leadership are not only nice people, but they're actually thoughtful, caring, and do have a vision of where the specialty needs to go. But we change so slowly.
Well, you mentioned some pretty powerful people there and influential people. Any other last words of wisdom to share with people watching this?
Seize the opportunities that come your way. And for some things, you may actually need to go digging a little to find the opportunities. I'm not sure where I got this quote, but if you aren't failing more than 50% of the time, you aren't trying hard enough. And by failing doesn't mean it's catastrophic. It simply means you volunteered, you said, I want to do that. And you do it for 6 months or a year or 2 years, and then you say, you know, this is not really for me. I want to try something else. And I think there are too many people out there who say, well, what happens if it's not right? I'm not sure, Adrian, if I want to be on this committee. Do it. You can always resign from any committee if it doesn't suit you. But step out there, seize the opportunities, see what you can make of them, commit yourself to it, and you'll find it adds to the richness of being a professional looking after sick people.
Good advice, and I think it's what's helped make you such a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you.